including pharmaceutical prices and what we're seeing in terms of those escalating prices. I've got me able to talk about the Iran agreement. If you've seen the news today, we are once again, the president, when he got us out of that agreement, he said he could get us a better deal. Remember that? And literally now, we are closer every single day to Iran developing a nuclear weapon because they are now busting the caps on the uranium enrichment, which is a real problem. And so that is, I actually talked about that at the debate because of the fact that this is just another example where we should be working with the rest of the world. Iran is a very bad actor, and that's one of the reasons why one of our main goals of foreign policy in the last decade was to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. And that's why we made this agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was an agreement with our allies, with our European allies, and then China and Russia were part of it as well, that made sure that there were inspections and this wouldn't happen. And what do we see now? Because Trump had made this campaign promise, he gets us out of the agreement, promising us a better deal, and we were 10 minutes away, one tweet away, from potentially going to war, and now we're seeing them increasing their capabilities to get a nuclear weapon. And I just think, as I said at the debate, we cannot have our foreign policy conducted by someone at 5 a.m. in their bathrobe. Okay, I agree, this is how he does this, but it's a much more serious thing than that. It is now to the point where we have literally gone backwards. And when you think about when he came in, there was no evidence that they were developing a nuclear weapon at all. And so now the evidence is there, without a doubt, that he has made us less safe when it comes to that agreement. And he's also made us less safe when it comes to climate change by getting out of the International Climate Change Agreement. He just left the G20, right? 19 of those countries agreed to be in that agreement, and they're part of that agreement. And we were the only one, the United States of America, which so long has been leading when it comes to renewable energy, right? We did some of them the first when it comes to that. Scientific research, agriculture research. We're here in Iowa, right? Norman Borlaug. Yes. We have always been in front of the world when it comes to that kind of research and the green revolution. Well, we need to move ahead. But once again, we fall behind. He took us out of the agreement on ballistic missiles with Russia. Now, they were cheating on this agreement, right? They were cheating on this nuclear agreement. We knew that, but it doesn't mean that you just abruptly get out of the agreement. It means that you work with your allies to try to stay in the agreement. So time and time and time again, you see him doing this. Culminating in yesterday, I think it is good to talk to people no matter what bad characters they are around the world. It is not bad that he's talking to Kim Jong-un, despite the fact that this is a ruthless dictator, but we are now on our third or fourth round of him promising, and this time by going over to the fence, and I said this is not, yesterday I said this is not like you're going and meeting your neighbor and bringing the dictator next door a hot dish, okay? This is a little different than that, but he doesn't attach it to a plan. He doesn't attach it to deliverables of what this is, because it's a very complex situation of how you're going to get down and you're going to reduce those nuclear weapons and you're going to reduce their missile capability to get to the point of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But once again, he just goes off. Not bad to talk to the guy. The problem is we don't get deliverables. We have summit after summit after summit. I don't think that foreign affairs is the first thing on the minds of everyone in Iowa. I've been around enough to know that. But I do think that working with the rest of the world is on the minds of the people in Iowa. And that means everything from trade. As we drove here into Atlantic, I was thinking of the effect of the president's trade policy and this trade war that we're still in, which has led, by the way, to an $891 billion deficit, right? Trade deficit, the highest we've ever had. And now he's going to start negotiations again with President Xi, but the effect of that, it's like, I was thinking as we go into Atlanta, it's like they're using the people in Iowa and our farmers in Iowa like poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos in Atlantic City. And maybe he should be looking at the people in Atlantic more than Atlantic City. just this week on people's minds, but I want to step back a little bit to me and why I'm running. And as was pointed out, of all these 25 candidates, what makes me unique, which was one of our jobs in the debate, was to point this out, which I did. I got my 45 seconds at the end and made my closing argument about what makes me unique as a candidate. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of that with you. The first is that my world in politics has always been listening to people and getting out there and talking to people and then getting ideas and bringing them back and turning them into action. It sounds pretty simple, but in today's politics, people have kind of gotten away from that, right? A lot of people are thinking, what's my next tweet? What am I going to do there? And I have always looked at that basic principle that you try to get things done. In the words of Paul Wellstone, who was Tom Merkin's best friend, he said that the focus is about how you improve people's lives. That's what we should be doing. And part of it is my background. When I got involved in politics, it wasn't actually at some higher level or anything like that. I ran a bunch of county commissioner campaigns, city council campaigns, worked my way up that through what we call in Minnesota the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, right? I was a county chair, right? I did that because I really believed in the momentum and that you get things done by working together. But my first actual involvement in a big political issue was when our daughter was born, and she was really sick. She couldn't swallow. And John and I were there in the hospital. She was in intensive care. It was a complete shock. We didn't know what was going to happen. And back then they had a rule that you got kicked out of the hospital in 24 hours, no matter what was going on. And in our case, we didn't even know if she was going to live or die. They thought she had a tumor in her throat. They didn't know what was happening. I'd been up all night. And while she's in intensive care, they kicked me out of the hospital. And as John is wheeling me in this wheelchair out while our little baby's in intensive care and they're throwing all these books at me that I'm supposed to read, I said to him, I bet this wouldn't happen to the wife of the head of the insurance company. It is kind of a momentary hilarious thing that I was thinking about. Political game, but that is what I said. And so we get out there and she's still in the hospital for a week and then goes back and she was sick for the first few years of her life. But in the middle of that, I found out that a lot of other moms were having the same experience. I was not in elected office, and so I went to the legislature and started advocating for one of the first laws in the country that guaranteed new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. And so we worked on that for a long, long time. And I still remember I learned a lot from that experience. The one is that when you're testifying in front of an all-male legislative committee with just a few women, that if you say things that are really embarrassing about like giving birth and episiotomy, so just go pass it. That's okay. So that was a good experience. The second thing that I learned was that when you really want to get something done at the end, there's still big, powerful interests that are trying to stop you. In this case, the insurance companies were trying to delay the time the bill took effect. They didn't want to have it take effect. And so what I did is I brought 6 pregnant friends to the conference committee, so they outnumbered the lobbyists 2 to 1. And when the legislators said, well, when should the bill take effect, they all raised their hand, my pregnant friends, and said, now. And so not only did they not delay it, they moved it up to the day the governor signed it. So they all got to make use of that. So that was how we passed one of the first laws in the country guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. So that's how and then the next thing that I did is just kind of start running for office and I worked first as at a law firm in the private sector, which I think is really important. I did that for, I think, 14 years, working on campaigns on the side. And then I ended up running to be the Hennepin County attorney and ran an office of over 400 people. And really that was important work because we could do things, not just prosecute crimes, but we're also able to work with people and prevent crimes from happening in the first place. And that's part of when I got so interested in mental health and addiction and some of those issues that I'll talk about in a second. And then I ended up running for the United States Senate. We had 2 women run before me, actually. And they had both very qualified, and they both lost. And I remember when I'm running, it's now 2005, 2006, I would still have people all the time say, well, can a woman win? can a woman win for this job? And I was like, well, a woman won in Texas. I mean, we really are to get this question constantly everywhere. And I remember I finally came up with a strange answer that I would never use today. But I said, well, you know, I'm not running. I'm proud to be a woman candidate, but I'm actually running on my record and what I can get done and my ideas and my abilities, and that's what I'm running on. And then they would still have some of these guys would have their hands kind of like this. And then I finally go, and you know what? Like when I'd be in a room of all steel workers in northern Minnesota that had never even had a woman legislator, I finally said, you know what? The last time I checked, half the voters are men. So if I was only running as a woman candidate just for that reason, I wouldn't win. And they all go, yeah. I have no idea where it worked, but it did. So, okay. So I ended up becoming then the first one elected in our state and going from there. That is unique is that my grandpa, who was from that part of the world, he was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground his whole life. He saved money in a coffee can so that he could send my dad to college. And he literally did everything he could, he and my grandma, to do that. They had no money. They had 8 brothers and sisters. My grandpa did because his parents died when he was young, but they also had to help raise. One was in an orphanage for 2 years. She was 8, and he went to Duluth and got her and brought her back. That was his life, going down in that cage every single day when he wanted to be in the Navy. But he was so proud of his 2 sons. And my dad gets that 2-year community college degree and then ends up finishing up at the University of Minnesota. My mom grew up in Milwaukee, and she got a teaching degree, and she ended up coming to Minnesota because they had strong teachers' unions. And she second grade until she was 70 years old. And I still meet people that say she was their favorite teacher. And she actually, her favorite unit that she taught was the monarch butterfly unit. She would dress up as a monarch butterfly with a tunic and tights and antennas, and she would carry a sign that said "To Mexico or Bust." And she would then release the butterfly in front of all these adoring second graders. But what I never could understand is she would always tell me how she would go grocery shopping afterward. And I never understood why she did that until right after she died. And this family came over, and the mom was crying, and she had this older son who was very disabled. And she said, "This is my son, and he had your mom in second grade, and she was his favorite teacher." And every year after he graduated from high school and had a job bagging groceries at this grocery store, when your mom released that butterfly, she would come over in that outfit with that sign to his store, and she would get her groceries and stand in his line and give him a big hug. So that was my mom. And I stand before you today as a granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as a daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, as the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for president of the United States. That you can make it in America, that you can succeed, that you can even run for president. I remember as I think about Iowa and coming here today, I got to meet with Jimmy Carter when I decided to run, because, Carter Mondale, I went to Plains, and he was telling me about his experiences here and how no one knew who he was when he started first running, and how he had even less percentage nationally right now than many of our candidates, but he got to know people, and they got to trust him, and they got to believe that he stood for integrity, and he stood for a change in our country. And I think that's a lot about what this election is about. And so that's why when I stood in that blizzard by that river, I wanted to make that point that I don't come from a political machine, don't come from money, that I have grit, but I also wanted to make that point that it's time to take on these challenges of our time. Because our economy, we came out of a mess, right? We came out of this downturn because of the resilience of our workers and our businesses, because of some steady policies that were put in place. But now we have someone in the White House that's just resting on those laurels, right? And just resting on the laurels of the people before him that had done all this work out there in the fields and in the factories. That's what's happening, instead of meeting the challenges of the day. And anyone that's led anything, whether it is a political party, whether it's a business, whether it's your own family, you know that you don't just rest on your laurels. You know, me and my kids doing okay in school, guess I never have to worry about them again. This is not how it works. You have to think of the challenges in front of you. And that's what really bugs me at its core. And you know what those challenges are. Climate change, and maybe we can do some of them with the Q&A, and the importance of signing us back into that climate change agreement. When I flew in today, I saw all those fields of water, and there's still so much trouble everywhere. And you think about what's happening now, it's not just those rising sea levels that we see in Florida, it is also the Midwest. It's also that woman named Fran who came with me to that debate in Miami. Yeah, you know Fran. And she, you have a Fran fan t-shirt. Fran was my guest in Miami. She was a long way from home. Okay? And I so badly want to tell her story, but it's hard in 60 seconds. And her story, of course, is the when I met her with those binoculars, is she's standing out there in the sleet storm near Pacific Junction, and she says, you know, this is my house, and my husband and I, we wanted to retire there. We're there with our 4-year-old kids. It's been there nearly 100 years. It's so old, there's horsehair in the plaster of that house. And she said, and I love the kitchen. I love how the light comes through the kitchen. And I said, well, where's the river then? Because you couldn't hardly see. Her house was half filled with water. She said, I don't think I'll ever be able to live there again. We hope she can. I said, is the river right here? There's raging water. She goes, no, that's the road. The river is 2.5 miles away. And she said, it's never even come this close to our neighborhood before. That's climate change. It's not happening just on the coast. It's not happening in 100 years. It's happening right now. So that's a challenge, getting into the International Climate Change Agreement on day one. That's what I would do. I put out on my website, I put out our first 100 days with over 100 things you could do without Congress, actually. And that is one of them. There are things you can do that have been waiting to get done. And then the other ones are things, bills that we have to introduce, and we have to do work through the legislative process. So that's one, making sure the clean power rules go in place, making sure that we have the gas mounting standards back in place. Second challenge we continue to have is the rural-urban divide. I wish we could have talked at that debate in Miami more on those issues. If you notice, I felt like going, hey, can we talk about rural issues? do that. And I'm sure we will in debates to come. Because I'm someone that's represented a state, I think with the 5th biggest ag sector in rural areas in the country, I think 5th biggest ag exporter. And so I know the precarious state we're in right now with the low commodity prices, with the closure of small farms to the point where Grassley and I put in a bill on farm bankruptcy to allow people to keep operating with small farms longer than they are able to operate them now because of all the problems. The volatile weather. The trade war and the effect that's having on rural areas. Donald Trump's granting of secret oil waivers, right? And that's supposed to be for little refineries that are having trouble from the renewable fuel standard. And I know you have an ethanol plant right here in this county. He has been granting those waivers for big oil companies like Chevron and Exxon, right? And that is basically erasing any of the gains that we've made with things like the new policy that just went in place on year-round E85. And so, you know, those are the things that we're going to have to do. And we can do a number of those things immediately to make change. And I figured rural-urban divide, well, the first thing you have to do is be able to email your grandma, and if she doesn't have high-speed internet, that's not going to happen, right? Rural-urban divide, you've got to be able to have good hospitals and education, understand food doesn't magically end up on your table, and understand the economic needs and the housing needs and other things of rural America. And that is something I am well equipped to do. Challenges, healthcare, right? Bringing down the cost of premiums, which is especially hard for solo operators in rural America. Making sure that we're able to negotiate our prices under Medicare, right? For pharmaceutical prices, which has been a major barrier in our country right now because those prices are so high. Bringing down the cost of common drugs like insulin. And those kinds of things have just been sitting. Because while he once said on a Fox News interview that he would bring drug prices down so far that it would make your head spin. He said this. What's making our head spin is the fact that thousands of drugs, their prices have gone up in double digits since he came into office. Those are promises that have not been kept by this president. Economics, the fact that we do not have shared prosperity, that tax bill having exacerbated it. As I pointed out in Miami, when you've got a situation where $1 trillion in debt, where you've got the way they changed the corporate tax rate and other things, where really the rest of us are left with hardly anything but the crumbs. And as I said, it's what I would call all foam and no beer, right? That's the fact. By the way, that came out of being at the Minnesota State Fair many years ago when I was at the beer garden, and I heard this young guy, he filled a beer for this other guy, and the guy got the beer and he said, "This beer, it's all foam and no beer." And so I thought, well, this is Donald Trump's economic plan for most of America. And then finally, we are seeing the challenge of not moving on really critical issues like infrastructure, really something he promised on election night, and mental health and addiction. And I'll just end with that and then take some questions. You know what the numbers are here in Iowa. You have only 64 mental health public beds in your entire state. So what's happened in this state, by the way, Arizona, which is much bigger, only has a couple hundred, just to give you a sense of it. Because what's happened is we moved from these state hospitals to community-based mental health care, which is a good idea, but then a lot of times the money didn't follow. And 1 out of 5 Americans sometime in their life struggles with mental health. 1 out of 2 struggles with addiction in some way, whether it's in their own family, whether it's in people they know. And yet we have not done really anything about it. 30% increase in suicides in this country. So if you hear about suicides with young people or veterans or farmers, it's not just an anecdotal story from your own state. 30% increase in 15 years in the United States of America. And that's why I put out a plan for $100 billion that would help with opioid addiction, that would get us the beds for treatment for addiction as well as mental health, that would make sure that we are helping with early intervention and in our schools and everything else. And you know how I pay for it? On the backs of the people that got us addicted, and that is those pharmaceutical companies. And to close, the 3 things to remember about me. 1, I told you, I get things done. I actually passed over 100 bills where I was the lead Democrat in Congress. This is in the gridlock since I came in. None of them are volleyball resolutions. They're like real bills. Okay. Secondly, is that I can win. As we pointed out, I have won in every single race, every place, every time. I have won all the way back to when I was running for the elementary school council in my elementary school. My slogan then, which I have now abandoned, was "All the way with Amy Kay." I won in Michelle Bachmann's race, in her district, repeatedly. I have won every single time in the congressional district bordering Iowa, right? That first congressional district. And it's not because people agree with everything that I say in those districts or every issue. It's that they trust me, I go to where they are, I tell them the truth, I look them in the eye and tell them the truth. And I think that's very, very important. Leading us to number 3, which is I am someone that's not going to make a bunch of huge promises, but I'm going to make some very important, bold promises. And that is that I'm going to have your back, and you can see all of our plans on our website, that I'm going to tell you the truth, that I'm going to be someone that will govern with integrity, which is something we are sorely missing right now in Washington, D.C. Govern for you. So I want to thank you so much, and I can't wait to take your questions because I know you'll have a lot of them. But I do want to know why you have a shirt on that says Fran. That would be my first question of you, because I didn't know she'd become so famous. So anyway, thank you everyone. Very good.